Hi, Steven. Nice to have you here today to discuss this new topic and very important topic of resilience. So, thank you very much for joining us again, because we have done already a little introduction to your career. That was great, really, because there's so much to say. And then we looked at a very dramatic event, destructive event, which happened, and some pictures uh, talking essentially about the North Korean attack in November 2014, where you were able to share your insight. And as we talk about resilience today, that was a practical exercise before even the word resilience became very common, I should say. We're glad to have you with us today, and we'll dive a bit deeper and trying to use your experience and guidance in some sense to structure our views on that topic. So thank you very much again to be here.
I appreciate the invitation, Guy, as always.
Thank you for that. I think the good start is even though we can imagine, everybody can imagine something. I think the good starting point is what does it really mean, resilience? Yeah, and it's a word it's a new word almost in the vocabulary of some people, and it means new things. It goes to when we put it in today's environment or reference or framework. Yeah. So how would you define resilience to get started? I mean, we're going to talk about resilience the whole time, but at least to get us a good start.
I think there's a couple ways to look at it. One is resilience in life, and the other one, I think for our purposes today, is more resilience in the workplace. The ability of a company and its people to prepare for, respond to, and recover from any situation. And I view it, the concept around a rubber ball. If you do it in slow motion, you throw the rubber ball on the floor, you see it contract, and then it explodes, it comes back. It gets new life, new shape, back to the original, if you will.
Okay, that's a good picture.
So I think that's a good way to look at it. One of the things that I find in business, at least until recently, the term resilience is foreign. People don't think that way. They don't plan that way. They don't really get what resilience means. And if you look at resilience in the broader sense, and you plan your work around it, you plan in your preparedness, your crisis management, business continuity, recovery. Oftentimes people link the word resilience with recovery. And I think resilience is the entire spectrum. It's being ready for it. Because if you're not prepared for it, you're probably not going to survive it. So those are some thoughts initially on the term resilience.
I think it's a good definition, and I like your picture about the rubber ball, because you can throw the rubber ball against all kinds of surfaces, and it some way or another it finds back its original shape, even though it was hit the surface in a very different angle and with a different dynamics at the end to come back to the normal shape. So I think that's a super example.
I think in companies today, if they think about the term resilience and their planning, then they'll be much better able to deal with whatever the crisis is or whatever the situation is, and to rebound from it, which then gives assurance to employees, contractors, partners, suppliers, stockholders, that you spent the time and effort to really think through this, and that you're in a better position. But, a great example today, Guy, is ransomware. Not everybody survives a ransomware attack. Not everybody does the right thing. We saw recently where a large company in the U.S. had an attack, and they decided almost immediately to pay a $15 million ransom. Another company down the road who had a similar attack paid nothing. Why? Maybe it's to do with preparedness. Maybe it's more than that. Maybe they were able, in the way they designed their systems and networks, by segmenting them, to stop the bleeding earlier. I don't know, but these are all thoughts around being resilient.
If I would extrapolate a little bit and summarize what you said before, I think it looks like, obviously resilience in today's view of the world is part, I think, of the long-term success of a company. It's not just a little thing here. It is not just short-term. It is also the long-term view which you enable in a good way, because things can happen all the time. And if you're able to be resilient, you can survive better. You are more robust for the longer term.
Guy, I know we haven't really covered this before, but I think it's important for me to say. Last winter in Davos at the World Economic Forum, the buzzword there was polycrisis. And what's meant by polycrisis or permacrisis, which is now in the Collins Dictionary, finding yourself having to manage a multitude of crises that affect you in different ways, all the way from extreme to mild, or not at all, doing it almost at the same time. And we've never really prepared in crisis management thought process to do that. It's like we create the policies and procedures to deal with a crisis, and then we deal with another crisis, but we don't deal with a multitude of them. And so I think a good way to look at resilience is in your planning. If you ask yourself what's going on in the world, and by the way, there's a report out of Davos called Insight 2023 from the World Economic Forum. It's about 60 pages long. And it actually highlights what's happening in the world with climate change, mental health, inflation, depression, all kinds of things that affect us, rising sea levels. Look at that, and you begin to think about how those things might affect your business and what you're doing about it. You are absolutely going to be more resilient in the broad sense of the term resilience. But you have to start there. You have to step back, take a moment, and think about what is it that might affect us at some point. And you can also look at it and say, I'm not worried about X, Y, and Z, because the likelihood of that is very low. But I am more worried about other things. Having a plan. You know what they say in a crisis, the reason that people panic is because they have no plan. You have to have a plan. So anyway, I wanted to add that in.
I think that's a good point, because we sometimes have a very simple view that already solving one crisis is great, but actually the reality is that we have seen that in recent months, that some companies and certainly countries have faced multiple serious crises at the same time. This is quite amazing, and I think even if your business is a bit larger, you may be exposed in many places and from many aspects also to multiple crises. But going on a little bit further, what would you say is a key, the key areas a company should focus when building resilience? How would you characterize that?
I go back to what I said about preparedness. So let me talk a little bit more about this. I think the best thing companies can do today is to establish a crisis management team or business continuity planning team, or whatever you want to call it. But the way you do this is you bring together every functional area in the company: legal, HR, communications, risk management, insurance, security, safety, IT, all the functional areas that keep it going. You don't need to really do the same with operations, although you could consider that if you like, because typically it depends on when something's bad is happening, whether or not you need certain operations at the table or not. And you want to ensure continuity of the business. But let me back up. So it's not just, hey, Guy, you're the head of IT. Why don't you designate or delegate somebody to attend a meeting? No, it's the leadership that needs to come together and listen to and think about these issues and making tough decisions in the heat of the moment. Who has the authority to do it? And then having succession plans so that if you're not available, Guy, and I work for you, I'm empowered to make the tough decisions. But you have to create a tree. And then you sit down and you do what I said. You take the various types of crises and situations that may disrupt your business, and you have conversation about it. You put written plans together. You test the plans. You have others look at them. You create familiarity. And now with that whole group together, you define roles and responsibilities very clearly. Who should be doing what? Who has what authority? If they don't have the necessary resources, then you need to help them, at least to provide the right guidance. And I think the same principle applies in your planning. If you're under attack and it's serious, you may not be able to overcome it with just the resources that you have in your company. You need third parties that you can call that have expertise that can come in and augment your operations and maybe take over certain things so that it allows you to focus more on the resilience, if you will. In the planning stages, that's really critical. And one of the things I've mentioned to you before, some of my clients, the CEO or the leadership says to me, okay, we'll do a crisis drill. We'll test our plans, but please don't do it, make it too difficult because, we don't want to embarrass anybody. And my response is, if we don't make it difficult, who's going to learn anything? And my assurance is, I will not embarrass anybody. We'll do it in a way that people learn, that lights come on, that they're better aware and better able to respond and make a difference in your resilience, if you will. And then I do the drills, and you know what? It works. It works very well. And I find that people afterwards are saying, wow, that was powerful. I really needed to have that experience in a time when you're not in the middle of a crisis, but it seems like you are. So I'll stop there. Those are some thoughts. There's more, but that's some.
I think in my mind, I totally agree with what you say in terms of getting the right people on the table, simulating serious things and not just simple things, and making the plans accordingly. I think also depending on your business, if things go well, your business grows. And I know quite some businesses who have a lot of IT involved in their business, making, and every day the IT is changed, evolved to do new functions and use this and use that. And in principle, the IT grows organically and supports more processes, is more data is moved from one place to another. And then it's a little bit harsh sometimes to see what the process is, finding an agreement, what is really a important process, a key process, and to agree on what is acceptable in terms of business impact to a process. How long can we be down before it becomes expensive? and then also going from there to the services, to the application, and so on, in a way that you can say, okay, this server and that application is so critical. And I think, if you're I have seen cases where there are so many dependencies between data, and then you don't know when you have to restore, where do I start, because this depends this depends that. So I think, in my mind, another powerful concept we have to kind of get familiar with is to make resilience robust, is to have an eye on when we build things, to build them for including resilience, and when we have existing stuff or legacy stuff, to, when we can, to add a phase of, I would say, business simplification. Let's make IT a bit more simple. Let's make the process a bit more simple, so that we stand a realistic chance to recover it when things go wrong. Because when it's too complicated or not documented, or everything depends on everything, restoration is very, very, very hard. And you don't realize it because your IT, as it grows organically. So I think taking a step back and simplifying it, if you can, will make it cheaper, I think, and will make it possible to restore. Any thoughts on that from your side?
One of the things I did in a previous company, I had a team member who was really good at sitting down with the functional heads of business, and we had, 150 of them. And he wrote business impact analysis plans. So he had the conversation that you just mentioned, and that is, what are you most worried about? What keeps you up at night? And helping them kind of rank their thoughts on recovery. So what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example. In the company I was in, as you know, we had hundreds and hundreds of applications. So when you go dark, now you want to come back. Which one comes back first? You don't want to wait until that moment to bring a whole bunch of people in a room and have a battle over which one comes back first. You want to at least have had some thought process that goes into it early on, so that a president of a division, as an example, already knows, at least for his area, what comes back. And it's a pyramid effect, right? It's like first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and so on. And then you bring those guys together, and ultimately the pyramid becomes the one for a division, for the company. Now, when you start to think about recovery, you know exactly where to go. A good example, we had thousands of cameras, of CCTV cameras. I can fill that. I don't need that restored immediately for most of that, because I can put guards, or I can put locks on doors, or I can do different things that get us by for the moment. However, there are other things that we need for drive revenue in our business, to get our product to our customers, that we've got to get at. We need to really make a priority. So in your planning, that's really, really important. Business impact analysis and documenting. That's one more thought, Guy.
Okay, that makes perfectly sense. I think that leads us to the next topic, is that we have the overall picture, but then we can also look at parts of it. We can say, how do we have financial resilience? Because obviously, our revenue is going to stop, or certain things are going to have an impact. So we cannot be, we must have some reserve somewhere. So I think that's an important one, which needs to be looked by itself in some ways. Then there is also making the employee resilient in some sense, because suddenly he has a radically new, he has no PC anymore, maybe he cannot email anybody anymore, or and he has still more pressure than ever to do his job. So any thoughts on which parts of, let's say, components of the resilience we have to look also on one by, besides the overall picture, also one by one a bit?
Imagine your company going dark. You have no connectivity, and this happens. And it may be a part of your plan, actually. How do you make payroll every week? Did you have a contingency plan around payroll and offloading to a third party? Do you have a backup database with all of your people that need to be paid? And by the way, many people live paycheck to paycheck. You must make sure that you have a continuity of that. And in a publicly traded company, just because you have no connectivity anymore doesn't mean that you don't have to track all the money incoming and outgoing, because you're probably traded. You have the U.S., you have the SEC to deal with. You got to prove that whatever you represent as your financials are accurate. So somebody has to do this. Maybe on a new computer, maybe on a piece of paper. I've done both. So, and then on the financial as well, your indemnity, your insurance. Does your insurance allow you to have a fund, if you will, to help you through this crisis? So those are a few thoughts, but there's so much around finance, if you will, that, and if I didn't say that they should be at the table in planning, then shame on me, because they absolutely have to be there. They're such an integral part of your ability to survive and recover.
You mentioned before, and I'll take that as a base for the next angle, that we have one crisis, we can have multiple crises, we have a plan, we may have multiple plans, and up to a point where billions is not something exceptional, or at least some aspect of it is not exceptional. So how do you move resilient thinking in the culture of the company, so it flows naturally in processes, it flows naturally in IT developments, or in the way we operate? Any thoughts about letting resilience flow in the company culture in a good way, so that at least it has its place, let's say, where it should be?
A couple of thoughts on this. The Davos outcome, if you will, polycrisis. So with polycrisis, it is really a good tool to use to think about what's the likelihood of something like one of those things happening to you, and then how would you deal with it? But the danger is also that you go down a rabbit hole because you're consumed by all this. It's all you do. Just think about, oh my God, the sky is falling. And so my point is, you have to be pragmatic. You have to be realistic. You have to think about likelihood of occurrence, timing, all of these factors. It may not affect you. And if it doesn't, then move on from it. Focus on the areas that are most likely to have an impact on you. And I think the same applies in a crisis, or in multiple crises. One is not as bad as the other. So you have to prioritize what is it you're going to focus on. And then I think you also need to determine ahead of time who are the key members of a team that you would want to bring in to handle X, to handle Y, to handle Z, depending on what it is. Because the danger is also that if you just have a core group and they're dealing with all of this, you're going to burn them out. And by the way, they may not have the expertise that you need to deal with it. So those are some thoughts.
Okay. I think two more questions, and I agree on the risk is that in many day-to-day work we are a little bit specialized and verticalized, and very few members in a company may have the bigger picture up to a certain depth. And I think that speaks also for, if you can afford it, to have maybe a few people who are specialized in business continuity will help a lot, because they would have a very systematic, in-depth view, both vertically and horizontally. But two more things maybe to conclude this video. And one is obviously you said you have to bring the people at the table, but bringing them once at the table is one thing, and that gets your resilience planning started. But how often do you need to train? How often do you need to update your plan? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, good points. I think once you've brought together the core team, the functional areas, people understand, they agree on their roles and responsibilities, and you write a plan. And the plan should be one that allows you to deal with almost any crisis. Not just one, not just, oh, we've got a little IT problem. It's a enabler for the business to deal with a crisis, whatever it is. And then once you have the plan, it doesn't just sit on a shelf somewhere, because your business changes. The dynamics of your business change. The global environment changes and risks change. So somebody has to own it, and somebody has to keep it alive, fresh. That's important. How often do you test your plan? At least twice a year. It can't be once a year. Too much happens in 1 year. And you may not always get everybody at the table to do a drill. I think as you do this more, you'll see a good representation. And I think the other thing that I'm seeing now more in crisis drills is they're including a cyber component in it. So a lot of the crisis drills are not just for cyber. They're for general crises, right? But if you also include a cyber component, which I've done for clients, it adds a whole other dimension to it, but it gets the right people from the IT area at the table as well, and they get to experience this, and people learn from it. That's the goal.
I think you bring up a good point, because when you have a certain natural catastrophes, it is quite clear what is happening. There is a flooding, there is a fire, it is not easy to solve, but at least the problem is well defined. But when you have a cybersecurity incident, you may not even know what's hitting you. It's not like you see there's water in your plant and you can't produce anymore, but you only know that there's an impact, but where does it come from? What can you do? What has been impacted? How can you get out of this? So I think the cybersecurity or part of it is absolutely an important part of this. And also IT is everywhere, so cybersecurity and IT together have a big role to play. And IT in general is in all the plans, I should say. But there's certainly a very more complex cybersecurity part, which needs a cybersecurity team to be an integral part of this resilience or planning. I have maybe my last question before concluding is, if I have not done anything, I read about it, I hear about it, but if I'm maybe, most multinationals are facing so many risks and so many incidents, so they are kind of forced into that direction. Maybe if I'm a small and medium-sized business, I may be the lucky one who has avoided all this trouble. But where do I start? Maybe that's my last question before concluding today.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're concluding with this question, because it's really important. And here are my thoughts on it. Especially for small to medium-sized business. Do yourself a favor and have someone who has a basic understanding of what we just talked about come into your company under NDA and take a look at where you are. So this is a journey that we're talking about. And my point is, if you don't know where you're starting from, you can't possibly know where you're going to or how you're going to get there. So this is not ever about embarrassing someone. It's not ever about, oh, shame on you, you've been, negligent. That's not what this is about. This is about being smart, about looking at it and saying that you've done this and giving the assurance to your workforce that you've done it. Look at it. Ask yourself, where are we? And then look at, where should we be? Where do we want to go? And then in between, what are the steps that you take to get there from most important to least important? And then, how much does it cost? Okay. Oftentimes you're going to be surprised that it does not cost as much as you think. We're talking about good habits, changing behavior, anti-phishing training, awareness training, multi-factor authentication, all these things you can do that give you a greater likelihood of avoiding a bad situation. And then knowing who you're going to call, right? The old Ghostbusters movie. Who are you going to call? That's important, that part of your planning. But again, whether you're small, medium, doesn't matter. You can do this and you should do this. And I have seen companies that do not exist anymore.
We could go on for a long time on this. I would like also to encourage the audience who is viewing this video to maybe share in the comments their experiences of either what worked or what didn't work, or how they see this evolve, because this area maybe still at the beginning, and I think it will become more and more important as this world where polycrisis becomes normal. We'll have to get better at it for our own sake, for our shareholders, stakeholders point of view, and not only, I should say, on a company basis, but even on a national basis. Sometimes it's the same at a larger scale. So please share with us what problems you faced in previous incidents or in implementing the programs we're talking about, and also please share with us what worked or your advice. That would be great, because we have tried to cover all of it today, but there's so many different situations as well as companies. So your insights will help everybody to understand this area. Any last thought from your side, Steve?
Yeah, I'm glad you did this because it's really important. I think the other thing I didn't mention is I don't care if you're a large company, small to medium-sized business, startup, we're all in a different place. And when I think about my ability when the phone rings to respond to a crisis, I have to look at, where's the company today? How resilient are they already or not? That really drives how I respond. And it makes a huge difference. So that's another reason why it's so important to take a fresh look, is to know where you are today and build from it. So I just kind of leave with that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Stevan. I think we covered a lot of ground today, and thanks for sharing your experience, your wisdom, and especially also your predictions, I should say. And hopefully that will give our audience food for thought or a place to start. So again, thank you so much for sharing.
Let's keep the dialogue going. That's great. Thank you.